Hello YouTube, how's everyone doing? It's Professional here. Welcome back to my playthrough of Call of Duty Black Ops. I hope that you guys are enjoying this series. If you are, do drop a like. We got a lot of history to discuss on this part here. On the next part, we're doing the defector. At the height of the Tet Offensive, enter the MACV building to secure vital intelligence on Soviet plans for the region. Okay, let's do hardened.
Today, communications are in chaos, and commercial flights from the airport have been canceled. While some
The Tet Offensive was the beginning of the end, when America really started losing the war. Inside the MACV compound in Way City, you established contact with the Russian defector.
No!
We know you did! He turned himself in at MACV. You were there, Mason. He had intel on Dragovich, everything, but it was a lost cause.
Shut the fuck up!
The NVA had surrounded the city. MACV had all but burned to the ground. The defector was surely dead.
He wasn't dead!
It was a lost cause, and you still went in. Why?
His protection team had gone dark. I couldn't accept that he was dead. I needed that fucking dossier! The forces came under fire, stopping the attack and forcing the battalion to return to the MACV compound.
Way City. That's when things really started to unravel for you, Mason.
The defector.
MACV compound in sight. You are jumping into some deep shit, Woods.
We're here to yank a defector with vital intel on Soviet involvement in Nam. We lost contact with his security team. He may be holed up in the MACV safe room.
He's alive, we'll find him.
SOC X-ray team, hook up. Hotel 6, come back. Hotel 6, do you roger? Lima 9, Hotel 6 is gone.
Here, Spass 12, hold your incendiaries. Where we heading, Mason?
The Tet Offensive happened in early 1968, January 1968, and this was right during the Vietnamese holiday of Tet, which is an extremely important holiday in Vietnam, and it's a holiday that's used to celebrate the Lunar New Year. Now, about this is there wasn't really a ceasefire or any kind of peace treaty between North Vietnam and South Vietnam at this time, but it was widely expected that both sides would not open fire on each other during this holiday. And one big mistake that a lot of South Vietnamese soldiers did, the South Vietnamese government sent a lot of their soldiers on leave at this time. So they sent them, to be with their families during the Tet holiday. Now, the North Vietnamese knew this very well, and the North Vietnamese decided to launch the surprise attack. So they basically launched the offensive. North Vietnamese were just pushing down towards South Vietnam in the Tet Offensive, and at the same time as the Viet Cong, who were basically South Vietnamese communists, they were basically staging uprisings in southern Vietnam. They were attacking South Vietnamese bases, American bases, doing sabotage, assassinations. And the idea of this was that the Viet Cong were supposed to cause so much chaos behind the, U.S. and South Vietnamese lines. It was to destroy the morale of South Vietnam. It was to destroy the morale of the U.S. And that supposedly that the, South Vietnamese people would rise up and support, the North Vietnamese. But that, uprising of South Vietnamese supporting the North Vietnamese did not really happen. Now, the U.S. ended up winning the Tet Offensive, but at great cost. So even though we had, pushed back the North Vietnamese and we pushed back the Viet Cong were, hit really badly. They were destroyed pretty badly during the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive, arguably, even though the U.S. won, was pretty much the end for the U.S. in the Vietnam War, because it was turning public opinion against the war because of the fact that there was this huge offensive by North Vietnam, and basically the idea was that the war was nowhere end in sight. So, politicians in America have been saying, oh, we're going to win, we're going to defeat North Vietnam any day now, but then now North Vietnam launches this huge offensive, and the American public basically starts saying, when is this going to end? And at the same time the U.S. was still drafting more people. So it was drafting more people, sending more people to the Vietnam War when there was pretty much no end in sight. So even though it was a victory for the U.S., it was I would say, a propaganda victory for North Vietnam and the Viet Cong. Now, as for what's going on here in Black Ops 1, this is the Battle of Hue. Hue City This is a city that's located in central Vietnam. It was part of South Vietnam during the war, and Hue City was also the city where the Nguyen dynasty of the last Vietnamese monarchy resided. They resided in Hue City. So Hue City was one of the places that had gotten attacked during the Tet Offensive, and the North Vietnamese army had pushed into Hue, and the Viet Cong were also supporting them behind, American and South Vietnamese lines. Now, the U.S. and South Vietnam were not prepared for this assault at Hue City at all, and what happened was the North Vietnamese has completely overran the city. And so when you're watching this is like the early part of February. The U.S. was getting overrun at this part. So the North Vietnamese had pretty much overran Hue City. There was evacuations, the U.S. was pulling out, but then ended up happening is near the end of the month, the U.S. actually pushed them back. Street by street, we pushed them back. So pretty much the entire city had gotten overrun right at the beginning of February, but then at the end of February, into early March, we were taken back street by street, and we eventually pushed them out. And then there was the Hue City Massacre, which was actually happening within the last weeks of the battle, which I'll talk about in a little bit. One thing I wanted to talk about that happened during the Tet Offensive was the My Lai Massacre, which the My Lai Massacre is just a stain in American history. It's one of the, it's one of the darkest days in American history. It's really, really horrible. But basically, the My Lai Massacre is the worst massacre committed by U.S. troops in the 20th century. And you probably heard about this massacre. I remember I learned about this massacre in high school. But what the My Lai Massacre basically was, it happened during the Tet Offensive. It happened in Son Mai village. And the American soldiers from C Company, B Company, they had basically gone into this village and just massacred the village, just killing civilians. They accused the civilians of being Viet Cong, supporting Viet Cong fighters. I saw no proof. There's no proof whatsoever that these villagers were helping the Viet Cong. They basically murdered, an entire village of just innocent people. Now, how many people died in this massacre? The United States says that around 347 people died. Vietnam states that around 504 people died. So the U.S. forces on that single day massacred hundreds of people. This massacre was so brutal. They went house to house, bayoneting people, shooting people, burning buildings down. They even took people to mass ditches, and they would just throw grenades in those mass ditches when they trapped them in there. There was women that had gotten gang raped by the American soldiers. There was even kids that were killed. Kids were bayoneted. It was gruesome. It was horrible. And what ended up happening during the massacre, there was actually an American helicopter pilot, Hugh Thompson Jr. Now, Hugh Thompson Jr., he actually had two other people in his helicopter with him, Lawrence Colburn and Glenn Adriata. Now, these guys, they were co-pilots with him, and they were also gunners. So he had actually landed his helicopter to see what was going on exactly, and when he actually found a lot of the bodies, he thought that a lot of the Vietnamese civilians had actually been killed by artillery. He didn't think that this was being done by American troops. And so he was deploying green smoke, which green smoke was basically to signify that the area was safe and that you can, extract these wounded people, because he found wounded civilians. When he came back, he saw that these civilians had been shot. So the wounded people that he put green smoke up for, they had been shot. They were killed again. And he was confused at that moment because he did not see any North Vietnamese troops in the area from his helicopter. He didn't see any Viet Cong, troops in the area. And then what he actually witnessed is one civilian actually asking him for help evacuating, and that civilian had actually been executed by an American soldier right in front of him. And so he realized at that point that the Americans were just going around just mass murdering this entire village. What he ended up doing at that point is he saw a bunch of villagers running away from the American soldiers, and he actually landed his helicopter in between the villagers and the soldiers, and he had his two guys actually point M60 machine guns at the American troops, and he told them that if they keep, pursuing these civilians, that he's going to order they all be gunned down. And at that point, they stopped chasing those civilians. Now, what Hugh did was he reported this to his superiors, and Hugh was demonized. A lot of his superiors were actually pretty angry at him for reporting this, and the American government actually tried to cover it up. They actually tried to cover up the My Lai Massacre, but what ended up happening is it was too big to cover up, and then a year later, it was actually revealed in 1969 about what had happened, and it was also it changed the American public perception of the war. Now, I know people are going to ask me what happened to the people. Was anybody actually charged for it? Well, there was only actually one person arrested for this, and the only person arrested for this was Second Lieutenant William Calley. And William Calley, if you actually look at a picture of him, he's actually scary. Like, his eyes literally look like a psychopath. Like, he literally gives that, cold, the cold-blooded stare. But about this is that William Calley was ordering basically his troops to carry out these atrocities, these massacres, and one of the reasons that his soldiers probably went along with this massacre is he was telling them that these were all, Viet Cong, infiltrators. These people had been supporting the Viet Cong. The weeks before that massacre, a lot of those units, they had lost a lot of their men to, mines and traps. And so he was basically telling these guys, his soldiers, these are villagers, are the ones who helped the Viet Cong, who killed your friends. And I'm not defending what they did. But I'm just saying is that he was, saying this to his troops, that these were the people who had done this, but there was no proof that these villagers were involved with the Viet Cong attacks on the other troops in this battalion, in this group. There was no proof of that whatsoever. These were just innocent civilians, and they had, been gunned down, murdered, raped, bayoneted. It was disgusting. Little kids had been killed. It was horrible. Now, about William Calley. William Calley originally got life imprisonment. Then he got 20 years. And then he got, 3 years of house arrest. And he was able to live out the remaining of his days. And largely a part of it was because Richard Nixon had interfered. Richard Nixon had interfered, and that was the reason that a lot of other soldiers had actually not been prosecuted. Now, William Calley, while he was, one of the top officers at the massacre site, there was other officers, there was other soldiers, sergeants, privates, corporals that were heavily involved in this and had carried out horrible atrocities, and they were never prosecuted. They were never arrested for it. We don't actually know the names of a lot of these. So a lot of these guys who were actually involved in this massacre, we don't know their names. We don't know, what ended up happening to them. The only thing that we know is we know that they were not, they weren't prosecuted for what had basically happened, and it was a mistake. I think that every single soldier that was involved in that, even the lower ranks, private corporals, it doesn't matter, all soldiers, every single person involved in that massacre should have been put on trial and then executed afterwards. That was just completely uncalled for. It was disgusting, it was evil, and it made the US look horrible during the war, and the North Vietnamese also used this as propaganda, and this is exactly what I mean is when America had pretty much lost the Vietnam War with stuff like this, because we lost the hearts and minds of so many people, and it was, and we should have made an example of the soldiers. The soldiers who had done this, they should have been executed. There should have been, public trial of this, and they should have been made an example of. But because we didn't, and we let a lot of these guys go, a lot of these murderers go, it was basically used as propaganda against us. So this, Hugh Thompson, he was given the award, I forget the name of the medal, but he was given the medal along with, his other two members of his unit for helping to stop the massacre. He was given an award, the highest decoration of heroism in a while not engaging the enemy. I'll have the name of the award down below. What ended up happening to Hugh Thompson is he lived until 2006, where I think that he died from cancer. Lawrence Colburn died in 2016, and as for the third guy, Glenn Adrietta actually died in combat. He died in combat during the Vietnam War, but he was still also given the same award. Now, let me actually talk about the next thing moving on here. We're actually talking about Hue City.
Move out!
Yeah, so the North Vietnamese would not be carrying a SPAS-12 incendiary rounds.
all over the north wing, Wood.
Light them up, Bowman!
Lima 9 is in now. X-ray, you're clear.
Come on, move up! Out of the way, go! Bowman, northeast corner!
On the way. X-ray, we're breaching the roof.
The whole damn building's overrun! Dispatch is next floor down! You think the defector survived this attack? Well, if he did, then he's one tough son of a bitch.
This was a real massacre that happened, the Hue City Massacre. This was the worst massacre of the Vietnam War.
What's he saying? Kill the civilians.
Your collaboration with the Americans is proof of your guilt. In accordance with party tradition, the punishment is to be carried out immediately.
When he says party traditions, he's talking with the Communist Party of Vietnam, and they did these BS show trials that only lasted for 10 minutes. They would round up people, and they would basically say, you've been accused of these crimes against, like, the Communist Party of Vietnam, against the working class of Vietnam, and then they would execute them. And they targeted priests, community leaders, police officers, soldiers, and their families. Thousands of civilians were murdered by the North Vietnamese when they entered Hue City. Like, look at this part.
Get down!
X-ray, this is Lehman 9. Anyone who doesn't get out soon isn't going to. The NVA have overwhelmed the entire North Wing.
Roger that, Lehman Niner. Moving on.
Safe room, just ahead.
Molotov!
So this right here, what's going on right now, this is the Hue City Massacre. And the Hue City Massacre, as you guys saw those civilians just running through and just getting mass murdered by the North Vietnamese troops. The Hue City Massacre, this was a real event that had happened, and this is the worst massacre of the Vietnam War. The worst one is Hue City. In terms of body count, it's Hue City. Now, comparing My Lai Massacre. During the My Lai Massacre, a few hundred people died, which is also really horrible. But if you look at the Hue City Massacre, it's between 2,800 to 6,000 people died. So thousands of people had died in this massacre. The North Vietnamese, when they entered Hue City, they killed between 5 to 10% of the entire civilian population of Hue City. And this massacre, you probably have never heard about this massacre. You probably never have until, you know, this video here. I actually did not even know about this massacre until years ago, you know, when I started reading more about, you know, the history of the Vietnam War on my own time. I never learned about the Hue City Massacre in school. When I was in school, I learned about the My Lai Massacre. That was, you know, a heavy part of our learning. But we didn't learn at all about the Hue City Massacre. And this is exactly what I mean when I say that America did not just lose the Vietnam War. America also lost the information war. America also lost the propaganda war because of the fact that you hear so much about the My Lai Massacre, but you never hear about the Hue City Massacre. The reason you don't hear about the Hue City Massacre is because the Hue City Massacre does not fit the narrative. And the narrative is that the Americans are, you know, evil, imperialist capitalists that are violating Vietnam's sovereignty, and that the North Vietnamese and the communists are here to liberate the, you know, the people of Vietnam and liberate the working class. It completely destroys that narrative that the, you know, North Vietnamese, that instead of being seen as liberators, that they're coming into the city and just pillaging the city and just mass murdering, you know, thousands of people. I'm not defending what happened with the My Lai Massacre. I'm not saying that, you know, stuff like that should be forgotten. The Americans that were involved in that should have been put on trial and they should have been executed. But my question here is, why do we hear so much about the My Lai Massacre, but we never hear about the Hue City Massacre? We should hear about both of these massacres equally. You only hear really about the American massacre, which was, you know, the worst massacre by American troops in the 20th century. But you don't hear about the worst massacre of the entire war, which is the Hue City Massacre. So what exactly happened during the Hue City Massacre? The one thing that's a little bit wrong with the Wikipedia page, the Wikipedia page has the amount of people that have been killed in the Hue City Massacre, right? But the thing that's wrong with the Wikipedia page is actually that it says that it happened on February 28, 1968, which that is right around that time is when the most amount of people started dying. So like right at that when the North Vietnamese had pulled out, the most amount of people had started dying. But the Hue City Massacre really started right when the North Vietnamese entered Hue City. The reason that the killings sped up and got like really bad near the end, like right near the end of the battle, is because the North Vietnamese thought that they would be able to hold Hue City. When they entered Hue City, they thought they thought they wouldn't have to come back here. They thought that they were going to take Hue City and they were going to hold it. And the Viet Cong were supposed to cause chaos behind the lines, and they were supposed to destroy the American and South Vietnamese morale. What happened is when the North Vietnamese entered Hue City, thousands of South Vietnamese civilians were running towards the American lines. They were not running towards the North Vietnamese lines. And the North Vietnamese got really angry at this because they were expecting that the civilians in Hue City would see them as liberators. And so the North Vietnamese, what they started doing is they started doing these show trials that were basically like a complete joke. It didn't matter, you know, you were going to be executed no matter what. These show trials, what they would basically do is they would basically read the charges against you. They would say what you've been accused of and that you've been found guilty. And they would last less than 10 minutes. These were done by soldiers. They would so a trial, they would catch you. Within 10 minutes, they would say you've been accused of this, this, this. And then they would just basically take you behind a building or, you know, to a mass grave and they would shoot you. A lot of people were actually taken away from Hue City. They were taken to mass graves. They were shot, they were bayoneted, they were dumped in these mass graves. There were so many mass graves that were actually found around the Hue City area. There were people that were tons of people that were found in body bags, and what happened is when the North Vietnamese realized we can't hold this city, the Americans are going to take this back. The Americans started pushing the North Vietnamese back block by block by block. When the North Vietnamese realized we can't hold this city, what they said is we're not going to take any chances, and we're going to kill anybody that could possibly collaborate with the Americans. So anybody that they thought would help the Americans, help the South Vietnamese, they were going to kill before they left. So they targeted priests. They targeted teachers. They targeted, any American and South Vietnamese prisoners of war. They targeted anybody from the South Vietnamese government, anybody who had, anybody's family who was related to the government. So basically, if your father, for example, let's say was like a captain in the South Vietnamese army, or like a high-ranking, police, lieutenant, what would happen is they would not just kill your father, they would kill the entire family. And the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, they would justify this by saying, oh, these people are traitors to Vietnam. They would help the Americans. They would help the puppet capitalist South Vietnamese government. Blah blah blah. So this was the worst massacre during the Vietnam War, and this was done by the Viet Cong and the People's Army of Vietnam, also known as the North Vietnamese Army. And like I said, you don't hear about this massacre. And this is what I mean when I say that the U.S. did not just lose the Vietnam War, the U.S. lost the propaganda war because of the fact that you almost never hear about this massacre. You don't hear about what the North Vietnamese did when they entered Hue. If you can Google this, you can look this up, sure, it'll pop up. But the point that I'm saying is that when it comes to the My Lai massacre, you hear about the My Lai massacre much more. The American soldiers that were involved in My Lai should have been put on trial and they should have all been executed, the people who had done stuff like that. But my only question here is, why do we hear so much about the American massacre, but we don't hear about the communist Vietnamese massacre? These were the communist Vietnamese were mass murdering their own people, the people of Hue City, because the people of Hue City did not welcome them as liberators running towards the Americans. They got angry and they started just mass murdering the civilians. And as for the Hue massacre, I know people are going to ask me, how does Vietnam teach this massacre today? The massacre, I actually asked a few of my Vietnamese viewers about this, and you guys have actually told me that this massacre is pretty much not covered at all in Vietnam. And it's a very gray area. If you bring this up in Vietnam, you could be arrested for this. There could be charges. Maybe you'll be arrested, maybe you won't, but you are generally not allowed to talk about this. So this massacre, when it comes to the Hue massacre, is largely forgotten in Vietnamese history. Is not taught in Vietnamese schools. The Vietnamese government pretty much ignores this. They talk about the My Lai massacre. There's a museum dedicated to the My Lai massacre, but there is no museum dedicated to the Hue City massacre. So that's like I said, America didn't just lose the Vietnam War. We lost the propaganda and the information war because you don't hear about stuff like this. The fact that the communists in North Vietnam are portrayed as such heroes, heroes who liberated their people, and the Americans are portrayed as like evil imperialist capitalists. That's basically the narrative, and because the Hue, massacre does not fit that narrative, people don't talk about it a lot, so it's largely been ignored in history because of that. And the other one I wanted to talk about is the Dak Son massacre. This was a massacre that had happened to the Montagnards people, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Now, the Montagnards people, they are actually an indigenous people. They are considered an ethnic minority that is in Vietnam. Now, the Montagnards, they were actually hated by both South Vietnam and North Vietnam. So both South Vietnam and North Vietnam had committed atrocities against them. And the reason that both North Vietnam and South Vietnam had hated them is because the Montagnards, they actually wanted their own independent country. They wanted their autonomous zone within Vietnam. Now, I believe they had an autonomous zone in South Vietnam at some time, but then No Dinh Diem, who's a dictator of South Vietnam, took that away from them. And then North Vietnam promised them this autonomous zone, but I don't think they even got that from North Vietnam. So both sides had really hated them. The communists had hated them. The South Vietnamese had hated them, largely because they basically wanted to be independent from Vietnam. And so the U.S. actually ended up helping a lot of the Montagnard people. They actually trained a lot of them. There's actually pictures of American soldiers that you can see training Montagnard villagers. And the reason that the U.S. helped them is for two reasons. The first reason the U.S. helped them is because it was seen as a propaganda victory, because the U.S. could use this as propaganda and say, we're helping this, ethnic minority that is fighting against the Viet Cong who is terrorizing them. So it basically helps America in its propaganda war. And the second reason that The second reason that we helped them was because they could basically be a buffer between us and the Viet Cong. So if the Viet Cong have to cross through their villages, they could fight back against the Viet Cong because they hated the Viet Cong. Now, as for the Dak Son massacre, what actually happened, the Viet Cong entered this village and had accused the people of Dak Son of being American collaborators, accused these people of helping refugees who were fleeing the Viet Cong, and what the Viet Cong did was they went into the village with flamethrowers, they burned the village to the ground, they threw grenades in buildings, they killed kids, women, their mass killings, mass shootings in the village. They burned people alive inside their homes. The Viet Cong were the ones who had done this. They basically wasted an entire village, killed an entire village of people, and then they kidnapped 100 other people and took them away. I don't know if it's been revealed what happened to the people that were, kidnapped also from the village and taken away. There's actually a really a famous picture that you can see of a child that's crying, and the child that's crying is injured, and that child's father had been murdered, and his house had been burnt down. So, this is another massacre that you don't hear about. Have you heard about the Dak Son massacre? No, you haven't heard about this massacre because, like I said, again, it does not fit the narrative. The narrative is that the Americans are, evil imperialist capitalists that are trying to, conquer and violate Vietnam's sovereignty, and the North Vietnamese are, welcomed by the people. They protect the proletariat, the working class. The communists are here to liberate you. So this does not fit that narrative that the communists were like liberators and they were, good people trying to, so that's basically it, is that you don't hear about like things like the Dak Son massacre, you don't hear about the Hue massacre because it does not fit the narrative, and it basically portrays the communists as, being evil and portrays the communists as being aggressors. And I'm also going to show you guys some more proof is the media is a huge factor in this because the media's deception and the media's basically, the media's what media chooses to cover and what the media does not cover. Everything should be covered. If the Americans commit an atrocity, it should be covered. If the North Vietnamese commit an atrocity, it should be covered. That's the way that I see it. Is I see it that the horrible things that both sides do, it should be covered. And as an American, I'm gonna have a bias towards America during the war, but I'm also gonna show you guys some of the bad things that America has done. Like when I talked about Agent Orange in the last part, I talked about napalm. How America has bombed and killed so many civilians in Vietnam during the war. But just because America America did do horrible things during the Vietnam War, America did commit war crimes, it does not mean that North Vietnam and that the Viet Cong are innocent. It doesn't mean that the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese are, good and honorable people. They were evil. They did some horrible things. You had the Hanoi Hilton, that's what it was nicknamed. It was a prison where Americans were taken. And in this prison, they were tortured. They were beaten. You had a very low chance of surviving if you were in the Hanoi Hilton. But you don't hear stuff like this. You hear that the North Vietnamese were liberating their country and they were saving their country. Now, this picture, I wanted to talk about this picture right here. I'm sorry that I'm censoring this picture. I'm sorry about that. I had to censor it to be safe, because the potential of YouTube possibly striking me. YouTube could possibly strike me, so I had to censor it. I did look at other YouTube channels. Some YouTube channels showed the full pictures, but they were older videos from 10 years ago. A lot of the newer videos that I saw, they actually censored part of the picture. So that's basically what I'm doing, is I'm censoring the picture just to be safe. But basically, if you want to see the full picture, you can go on Google and type in Saigon execution. This is probably the most famous picture of the Vietnam War. Chances are you have actually seen this picture. It's a very famous picture from the Vietnam War, and a lot of people say that this picture pretty much ended the Vietnam War. That's what a lot of people say, and I would probably agree with that. This picture pretty much ended the Vietnam War. This picture, I've seen this picture in school textbooks. When I was in high school, we've seen this picture. Our teachers showed us this picture. But the thing about this picture is, what if I was to tell you that this picture is actually deception, and that this picture itself, you don't know the full story on this. So if you actually take a look at this picture, and hear me out on this, just listen to what I have to say on this before you judge. This picture is a perfect example of media deception, and how media can basically trick people into believing a certain way, because photographs can lie too. Now, what's wrong with this photograph? What is the lie in this? Let's take a look at the photograph with no context, right? If we're taking a look at the photograph with no context, we see a Vietnamese man being executed. The reason I had to blur out his face right here and the guy's gun, the guy's holding a revolver, and he shoots the guy. And as he shoots the guy, in the picture, the revolver is in the process of firing, and the bullet is actually hitting the guy's head in the picture. So that's why I had to censor the image here. But the guy's clearly scared, and half a second later, the guy falls to the ground. He's dead. He's been executed. Now, if you take a look at this picture and you take a look at what the media narrative is, the media narrative with this picture was that this guy This guy was, a protester who was protesting against the Americans, against, the South Vietnamese government, and, the evil South Vietnamese, general went and, killed this peaceful protester and executed him in the street. But what if I was to tell you that's actually not true? The guy who actually executed the person in this photo, the guy committing the murder, his name is Nguyen Ngoc Luan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was a general in the South Vietnamese army. So this was not an American. So people saying it was an American soldier executing this Vietnamese man, it was not an American, it was a South Vietnamese general. That's one thing that's misinformation. If people lie about who the guy in the photo was, it's not an American, and these were South Vietnamese troops that were here. The second thing that's misinformation about this photograph is exactly what the guy did. So the guy, let me actually have the guy's full name right here. The guy that he's executing his name is Nguyen Van Lem, if I'm pronouncing this correctly, and he is also known as Captain Baylop. That was his Viet Cong name. Now, this picture was taken during the Tet Offensive. This is in Saigon, which today is named Ho Chi Minh, which was the capital of South Vietnam. It was the capital of South Vietnam at the time. When the North Vietnamese took it, they renamed it Ho Chi Minh City. Now, during the Tet Offensive, there was attacks that were happening even in Saigon. So the Viet Cong were launching attacks. Again, it was to, attacks on the Americans, attacks on the South Vietnamese, armed forces. It was to, create chaos behind the lines. That was basically it. It helped the North Vietnamese army with their advance. Now, about the guy who got executed here, Nguyen Van Lem. He was not an innocent civilian protester. This guy was a captain in the Viet Cong. And the Viet Cong, like I said in my previous part, the Viet Cong was a terrorist organization. The Viet Cong had done horrible things. The Viet Cong are not these freedom fighters that they are portrayed to be. The Viet Cong, no freedom fighter is ever going to commit murders, especially against their own people. Freedom fighters are not going to do that. They're not going to commit murders, and they're especially not going to commit, murders against their own people. The Viet Cong, they have an entire Wikipedia page of just numerous atrocities that you can see that they had been committing for 15 years. And a lot of these atrocities, the U.S. fully entered the war in 1965. You can find atrocities that the Viet Cong had been committing years before this, in the early 1960s, before the U.S. even fully entered the war, where the Viet Cong were targeting priests, they were targeting Buddhist monks, they were bombing schools, which they had, there were schools that they had accused of, private schools, which they despised, which they accused of being, propping up the upper class, and so they justified, attacking these schools, saying that these schools were, schools of the upper class kids, and so even the kids were fair game targets to them. The Viet Cong would stop buses of people, they would rob people, they would kill people, they would extort villages, and when the Viet Cong treated prisoners of war, if you were like an American and you got captured by the Viet Cong, your chances of survival are almost zero. If you got captured by the North Vietnamese army, at least there was a chance of you surviving. The North Vietnamese army was very cruel also, but there was at least a chance you could survive. But with the Viet Cong, the chances of you surviving were almost nothing. That's how the Viet Cong treated their prisoners. So the Viet Cong were merciless to their prisoners. They had no mercy whatsoever when it came to their prisoners. And this, and the thing about this is, you see now how the script has flipped here exactly. That a Viet Cong prisoner is being executed. And this is not just a regular Viet Cong soldier. This guy is a high-ranking member. He's a captain in the Viet Cong. And also, I know people are going to say he's a captain. Okay. But it's not just about the fact that he's a captain, it's about what this guy did. This guy was leading a death squad. And what the Viet Cong death squads were doing, his unit's mission, what they were in charge of is they were in charge of assassinations. What this guy basically did was, him and his Viet Cong buddies, they had basically broken into a South Vietnamese military base in Saigon. During the chaos of the Tet Offensive, they ended up taking over this small military base in Saigon. Now, this small military base, it had tons of tanks in there, but the Viet Cong had no idea how to drive the tanks. What he and his guys did was they kidnapped a South Vietnamese police colonel. I think he was a police colonel or a police lieutenant, but he was somebody that was high up in the police that had that worked with the South Vietnamese military. Now, they had kidnapped this guy, and they had basically told this guy, teach us how to drive the tanks. The guy refused. The guy refused to cooperate with Van Lem, that guy that's getting executed right here. What Van Lem did was, he had killed him, executed him, not just him, but 6 of his kids. 6 kids this guy killed, and he even killed the guy's 80-year-old mother. This guy literally wiped out an entire family. Now, I know what some people are going to say. Is there 100% proof that this guy had done this? There is not 100% proof that Van Lem was the one who had done this, but What we do know is that Van Lem was found right near the scene. He was found not too far from the scene where these murders had happened. That's where he was caught. He was a Viet Cong captain. We know that 100%. He was a high-ranking member of the Viet Cong. On top of that, his widow actually confirmed that he was a member of the Viet Cong. So there is no question about this. We 100% know this guy's a Viet Cong. He's a Viet Cong captain. He was the leader of a death squad. He was found near the scene where these murders had taken place. And so the only question now is, was he the one who actually pulled the trigger, who killed the entire family, or was it other people? But regardless, he was there. He was there with those guys as they were carrying out those atrocities, as he was carrying out those atrocities, those murders. So you see now when I add so much context to the picture, you see how much the picture has changed. Before I told you that story, before I basically explained the background behind that picture, what do you see when you look at the picture? You see a South Vietnamese general here coldly executing a man in civilian clothing. And you basically think, oh, this is an innocent man that this guy is just executed. He just shot him right in the head. But when you add context to this situation, when you read more about what had basically happened, it changes the whole thing. So pictures can be misleading. And what happened was, this picture was taken by an American photographer for the AP News, Eddie Adams. Now, when Eddie Adams took the picture, the South Vietnamese general saw him actually take the picture. He didn't attempt to actually take the camera from him. And what he said to Eddie Adams afterwards is, he said, when he was talking about the Viet Cong, he said, they killed many of my people, they killed your people as well. And then he said, these guys had killed so many people, may Buddha forgive me. I think Buddha will forgive me. I think it was something along those lines. He said that these guys had killed so many people, I think Buddha will forgive me. That is what the South Vietnamese general had said to him. Now, this picture had gone viral. And in the United States, when medias were basically, showing around this picture, they were not explaining the context behind this picture. And to be fair, at the time, we didn't really fully know what the context of this picture until a few years later. But about the South Vietnamese general who executed Van Lem, I was reading a bunch of sources about him, and there were several sources that said that he knew the police officer who had been executed, him and his family. There were sources that I read where it said that he was a friend of his, and he knew him and his family. And then there was other sources that I read where he didn't know the police officer and his family that was murdered, but he knew about what had happened because his soldiers had just told him that this guy had basically, was found right near the scene and had, committed these horrible atrocities there. So I don't know if Luan, if General Nguyen knew the victim, the people that this guy was accused of killing. That I don't know. Like I said, some sources say he knew them, other sources say he didn't know them, but he knew about what the guy did. That we do know. And now, if you change the context of the situation and you look at it, put yourself in that position right there. I'm not saying what Luan did was correct. It is murder. Technically, it's murder. Even if you kill a murderer, it's still murder, technically. But just put yourself in that situation. Let's say that he was his friend, because that's one of the versions of the story, that he was his friend. So you are, a general, and you just catch a guy who killed one of your friends. And not only did he kill one of your friends, he killed your friend's wife, he killed your friend's kids, and his 80-year-old mother. And you were arresting this guy who had basically done this to your friend's family. How would you react in that situation if you were the general? Even the people who would not kill him, a lot of people, that would be crossing their minds. That would be probably crossing most people's minds, that you want to kill this guy right here, then and there. So that's basically what I mean when I say media deception. That this picture, because it did not tell the full story, what happened is that you basically see a picture of a South Vietnamese general, executing a man, and you think this guy is innocent, but in reality, this guy was a mass murderer. So again, we don't know if Van Lem was the one who had pulled the trigger on all of those people who had died, but we do know that he was there. That we do know. He was involved in those murders. He was a Viet Cong captain. This was not an innocent man. Now, what about, I wanted to also point out to one other thing. There was also a famous a guy. Oh yeah, Juan Nguyen, if I'm reading his name correctly. So Juan Nguyen, he was actually an American admiral. So he was a Vietnamese American that became an admiral in the United States. And he was actually one of the victims there. So he was actually one of the kids that survived. He was a survivor. And his mother had actually protected him from Van Lem and his goons. And his mother shielded him, but he still got shot. He got shot 3 times, 2 times in the body, and one time in the head, but he somehow had survived. And later he was evacuated to the U.S., and he ended up joining the U.S. Armed Forces, and he became an admiral later. But that's a story about one of the survivors. Now, about Luan, what ended up happening to him. About Luan is that he he had fought at I think it was the Battle of Hue City, which you're going to see in Black Ops 1 here, and he actually got shot multiple times by a machine gun in the leg. He lost his leg. So his leg was amputated, and he actually stayed in Vietnam all the way up until the point of the fall of Saigon. And when Saigon actually fell in 1975, he actually evacuated with the Americans, and he evacuated to the U.S. Now, what ended up happening was, years later, there was actually a hearing in the U.S., and there was politicians who wanted to deport him to Vietnam, and they were saying that this guy is a war criminal. You know, this guy had, committed a murder. And there was a hearing about him. And what had happened was Eddie Adams, the guy who had actually taken the picture, the reporter who was taking the picture, he was actually brought in to testify against the general. And he actually did the unexpected, because the reporter was brought in originally to testify against the general, but the American reporter, Eddie Adams, actually testified in favor of the general. So he testified defending the general. And because of his testimony, the general was allowed to stay, and he was not deported. If he was deported to Vietnam, he would not have gotten a fair trial. I can 100% guarantee you that, and he would have been executed. So now, you guys tell me in the comments, you guys think what General Luan did was right or not? In my personal view, what I think about the general is, I think that the general had basically snapped, and what he had done was vigilantism. That's pretty much what he had done. It was vigilantism. Because I'm telling you, if he didn't execute Van Lem there on that street, what would have basically happened was that Van Lem would have been put on trial, and he would have been hanged or shot. The result would have still been the same. Van Lem was going to die, no matter what. He would have been, tried as a mass murderer, and he would have been, found guilty, and he would have been executed. What I personally think should have happened is, I think that Van Lem should have been put on trial. I don't think that Luan should have executed him. He was the guy was a mass murderer, but I don't think he should have executed him. I think that Van Lem should have been put on trial, and the South Vietnamese should have made that trial public. They should have televised it, and they should have said, this is a Viet Cong, captain. This is what he was doing on the orders of North Vietnam, is, he murdered an entire family. He killed children. And after the trial, execute him. Once he's found guilty, execute him after the trial. But I think that, executing him in the street like that, that's pretty much vigilantism, what the general did right there. And what North Vietnam did was they used that as propaganda. This picture is used by Vietnam even today as propaganda. But you don't even know the full context of the background on it. And look, don't believe exactly what I'm saying just as an American. You can Google this. You can look up this photo if you do not believe me. You can look up the backstory. There are some people who dispute the story of what had happened, but all the sources that I have read have basically said this guy was a Viet Cong captain. We know that 100%. His wife confirms he was a Viet Cong captain. He was part of a death squad. He was going house to house. They were murdering people, assassinating people. We don't know if he was the one who exactly pulled the trigger, but we know he was part of a death squad, and during the Tet Offensive, he was going around and, committing murders. So that's it. So the guy would have been executed if he had been put on trial. But that picture, I will say, that picture destroyed General Luan's life. It destroyed his life because he was branded after that as like a cold-blooded murderer. And the guy who had basically was accused of killing children, little children, that guy was basically portrayed as a victim, an innocent victim. So you see how a single picture, can basically change everything so much. The media took that picture, they didn't tell the full story of it, and they destroyed General Luan's life. And the thing is, that picture nearly got General Luan killed, because he almost got deported over it. But if it wasn't for Eddie Adams' testimony, he would have been deported back to Vietnam, and he would have been killed. What happened to General Luan is that General Luan ended up opening up a pizza restaurant. I think it was in Washington, D.C., but he ended up opening a restaurant with his wife, and he lived out the remainder of his days fine for the most part. But what happened was, in the early 1990s, it was actually discovered who he was. And because, like I said, most people did not bother to do their research, most people did not bother looking into exactly the backstory behind the photo, they had started threatening Luan, and Luan started getting death threats, and I think he ended up closing his restaurant down. And what ended up happening was, the reporter actually visited General Luan at his restaurant, and when he went in the restaurant, he actually saw in the bathroom there was actually a big sign in graffiti that says, "We know who you are, effer." So he was getting death threats over this. So there's people that were being, threatening him, that did not even know the full context of the picture. Like I said, I'm not defending vigilantism. I'm not defending vigilante action. What General Luan technically did was murder. Technically it was. But I don't think that you can compare General Luan's actions to what Van Lem did, because what Van Lem did was way, way worse. This guy had murdered an entire family, killed innocent children, little kids, and he almost, killed that last victim, but the last, kid had ended up surviving, the massacre. So, Van Lem was a piece of crap. That's what he was. If he should have been put on trial, and it should have been, broadcast publicly that this guy was a murderer in the Viet Cong, and that, justice will now be taken in, and he's going to be executed. But because, General Luan made a mistake, And what I think personally happened with General Luan is I think that General Luan snapped. That's what I think personally happened. He snapped, he got really angry, and, he saw this guy who had basically killed a bunch of children, and, he filled him with rage. It was, he saw red, and that's pretty much it. He killed Van Lem. So, like I said, is, we can judge Luan, and we can, say that it was, he's a cold-blooded murderer, but at the same time imagine if this guy had basically killed your best friend, and had killed your friend's kids, and his wife and his elderly mother, and left his last child, as an orphan. I think that a lot of us would be absolutely filled with rage, and even if we wouldn't hurt Van Lem, it would cross our minds that we want Van Lem dead. That's basically it. Now, about what happened to General Luan, he died in America in 1998 from cancer. He did visit the Vietnam War Memorial, and Eddie Adams actually wrote a eulogy about him. So the reporter who took the picture, and the reporter regretted taking the picture. He regretted it. He said he should have never taken the picture. He said he got rich off of the picture. He made so much money off of the picture, and he said he got rich while he destroyed the guy's life. So the reporter himself regretted taking the picture. He wished he never took the picture. But what Eddie Adams said is, he said this famously. He said after the general died, he wrote a story about him. He said, "The general killed the Viet Cong. I killed the general with my camera. Still, photographs are the most powerful weapon in the world. People believe them, but photographs do lie, even without manipulation. They're only half-truths. What the photograph didn't say was, what would you do if you were the general at that time and placed on that hot day, and you caught the so-called bad guy after he blew away 1, 2, or 3 American soldiers?" Yeah. And I will say also another thing is, the Viet Cong did not operate according to the rules of war. A lot of them did not wear uniforms. They blended in with the civilians. They pretended to be civilians. If you look at what Van Lem is wearing, what is Van Lem wearing? He's dressed in civilian clothing. He's dressed in a checkered shirt. He looks just like a civilian. He is dressed as a civilian, but he's an enemy combatant. He's a terrorist, and he just committed a bunch of mass murders. And General Luan even said that I can respect North Vietnamese soldiers because they're at least wearing a uniform. I cannot respect a coward who is not wearing a uniform and uses a revolver to kill people. So that's what I'll say about that, is that the rules of war do not apply to spies when it comes to the Geneva Convention. Is if you are, a soldier, and, you surrender, and you have clearly identifiable uniform, you are protected under the Geneva Convention. But if you are a spy, if you are dressed in, civilian clothing, and you are committing acts of sabotage, then that does not fall under the Geneva Convention, and at that point, that falls under the jurisdiction of the laws of the country. They decide basically what they want to do with the spy. So that's pretty much it. But basically, the point that I'm getting at here is I saw this picture in my school textbook, this famous picture. And for years and years and years, I did not know the backstory of this picture. I saw this picture, and I basically just thought that it was like a South Vietnamese, officer executing a protester. That's basically what I thought when I looked at this picture. But I did not know the backstory. I didn't know the backstory that the guy executed was accused of killing a bunch of children. I did not know that. And how did I even find out about this? How I found out about this is I actually did not even look this up myself. How I found out about this is like a year ago, maybe more, it was more like, 8-9 months ago, I was doing a live stream, and, people were asking me historical questions about the Vietnam War. We were talking about this, and one of my Vietnamese viewers, who's probably going to end up watching this video, he's been watching a lot of Blackouts videos, was actually the one who told me about the picture, and he told me, look up the picture, look up the backstory behind the picture, and I did what he told me to do. I looked up the backstory behind the picture, and I didn't even know that, and when I looked at the backstory picture, I was like, oh my god, like, I was basically, misled by the media. I was misled by it, because I didn't even know the backstory. The only thing I saw was the picture, so that's basically it, is how, a single picture can cause so much misinformation, that they basically took a mass murderer, somebody who had killed children, and made him look like a hero, like somebody who was innocently gunned down, and they took a general who was, who basically was filled with rage, that it was supposedly his friend who had, been killed, and executed, a murder in revenge. So that's it. I'm not defending what General Luan did. I don't think it was right, killing, Van Lem in the streets there. But the only thing that I'm saying is that I'm saying that the result would have still been the same. If Van Lem was put on trial, he would have still been executed and hanged. The only difference is it would have happened later. This was vigilante justice that he did, and he shouldn't have done vigilante justice. It should have been, he should have been put on trial, but because he did this, it was filmed. And then North Vietnam and the communists use this as propaganda, and people believe this picture to this day, are misinformed about this picture to this day. But that's basically it on that. Let me continue the rest of the mission here.
You're up, no? Target down!
Anh nói số đấy, ta thấy nè, phía thương! Có người bị thương!
Yeah, this mission is like a horror show. But this is really the only game that I've seen, or, even Vietnam-era media, that has ever portrayed the Hue City Massacre.
Safe room's been breached.
So where's your contact?
He might have fallen back to the command room. He may still be alive. Let's move. On me.
The safe room's on the other side of the war room. Get out of there! Hostile down!
Tango down.
苏处长，放松来。
He's down! Target down! Target down!
xác nhận.
Roger!
Ngược rồi, bị thương. Phải. Đập nó một quả đi.
Frag out.
Ra đây luôn nè.
RPG!
Trung tâm, bên đây. Thằng kia. Hăng lạc hướng thừa. Không chết ổn định. Thằng kia.
I'm empty! Reloading!
Reloading. Give me cover.
Yếu đã. Không xuống đẩy. Để tôi. Nó đang bay rồi. Chú trọng thắng rồi. Tôi hiểu rồi. Chú trọng.
You're taking fire!
Ai trời ơi. Ngược rồi.
He's dead.
Cứu thương. Qua bên đây. Anh kia. Rồi, thua rồi.
Clear.
Oh,
Lima
crap, that
Niner,
was
sit
close.
rep, over.
X-ray, the NVA have retaken the MACV South. You are cut off.
Shit. Roger that, Lima Niner.
You better get your asses in gear if you want an evac.
Let's go.
Listen, you can hear the numbers in this part.
He should be in one of these rooms.
Mason, take the door at the far end of the hallway.
Also,
Ooh.
don't spoil this part for anybody. If anybody has seen or played Black Ops 1 before, please in the comment section don't spoil the really shocking thing for new people that are watching this, because a lot of people that haven't ever seen this campaign, they're gonna be watching this playthrough. But the really shocking thing, because it's really worth it at the end, you know what I mean when the really shocking thing.
On me.
Mason.
Reznov. How'd you get out of Vorkuta? Never thought I'd see you alive.
Not are you, my friend. I am here with a warning. Your government would do well to heed. Dragovich is planning an attack on the west.
Mason, you get what you came for?
Dragovich, I knew we'd see him again.
His influence spreads like a cancer. Even the Kremlin does not know what he is truly planning. He must be stopped, Mason. Dragovich, Kreshenko, Steiner, all must die. Are these your men?
Woods, Bowman.
I am Reznov. Victor.
What took you so long, Mason? That intel better be worth it. Lima Niner, where the hell's our pickup?
X-ray, be advised, Marine forces are engaged in heavy fighting west of the MACV. Push through to Rally Point Delta, 2 clicks north of the river.
We'll make it. You just be there.
We wish you no harm. The People's Army of Vietnam is here to liberate you.
Yeah, sure. They would play propaganda like this, and then they would basically kill anybody that they didn't like. And if you were taken as a prisoner by the NVA, you had at least a little bit of a chance of surviving. If you got taken as a prisoner by the Viet Cong, you had no chance of surviving. Almost none. The Viet Cong were, completely relentless towards their prisoners. They treated their prisoners so horribly. And this is what people forget. The NVA murdered so many Vietnamese people. If you were an anti-communist, you were a target on their list. So even if you were not helping the Americans, you were a target if you did not agree with communism. This is, the part people miss a lot.
For this shit.
RG Texas, this is 1-5. We need immediate air support at Grid 7, Delta Oscar Tango.
1-5, we do not have authorization in that grid. Everyone's in the chute, son.
Pull it together and give me that radio.
What are you, SOG?
Just give me the radio.
Good luck with that shit.
Oh, it's gonna be
Texas,
good.
this is Sierra Oscar Golf X-ray. Priority 1, ordnance in my command. I authenticate Golf 2, over.
Roger that, we're inbound.
This is gonna be good.
thấy chúng rồi. Không đợi chúng đã. Xác nhận chưa mục tiêu. Tại chỗ rồi. Có rồi. Hắn kia. Hạ chúng thôi.
X-ray, move
We have
out!
confirmed kills at 0. Area secure.
Rain fire! Anh bị thương rồi. Phải. Đó.
He's down!
Có người bị thương. Phải vậy. Tao thấy nó.
X-ray, we have no visual on targets. Request coordinates over.
It is over for you. Tôi thấy chúng rồi.
Target down!
Texas, ordnance on my mark.
Roger that. We're inbound.
Có rồi.
So when people think of the Vietnam War, they don't typically think of stuff like this. They think of jungle warfare. They don't think a lot of urban house-to-house fighting like this. But this is what happened at Hue City.
Contact down! Got it!
Phải. Đó. Nghe rồi. Enemy down.
APC's down! There's a fucking tank out there! Mason, tag that son of a bitch right now!
Texas, we have enemy armor at Victor Zulu 7 Foxtrot.
Affirmative, X-ray. Texas raining hell.
Xác nhận. Tao thấy nó. Anh nói xuống đấy. Cướp tên, anh đi. Không là cướp rồi.
Không đợi chúng đã.
X-ray, move out!
Shoot the one.
Tank destroyed. X-ray, you are clear to proceed.
Keep on that Mason.
The LZ's half a click away. End of the street. Mason, take your time, brother!
Im chợ cao rồi.
Mason, put that
Yes, I-
ordnance on the buildings!
Guess I cannot cut that fruit.
Marking coordinates. Take them out.
We see you, X-ray. Support on the way.
Need that support. Yeah, it's too much to push through this street.
Có người chúng đã.
Hostile down!
Đó.
Lúc rồi.
Không chết ông bẩn.
We have confirmed kills at 0. Area secure.
Tại chỗ rồi.
Texas, your target is tagged.
Clear, X-ray. We are engaging.
Ah, damn. They were just pushing up on me like crazy there.
Affirmative, X-ray. Texas raining hell.
Xác nhận. Anh chưa.
Get to cover.
Anh hay. Tao thấy nó. Không chụp đi.
Có người chúng đã. Theo dõi mục tiêu. Chia thương.
X-ray, move out!
Hạ chúng đi.
Tank destroyed. X-ray, you are clear to proceed.
Rain fire.
The LZ's half a click away. End of the street.
Marking coordinates. Take them out.
Roger that. We're inbound.
Con thi hành hết rõ. Bắn chúng lại. Đưa.
We have confirmed kills at 0. Area secure.
Rain fire.
Anh nói xuống đấy.
Texas, ordnance on my mark.
Coming in, X-ray. Keep your heads down.
Ai cái này á.
Tôi thấy chúng rồi. Nằm xuống.
Target eliminated!
Không chụp đi.
He's down!
Ừ, tôi hiểu rồi. Tôi chết rồi.
Enemy down.
Rain fire. Shoot the one. Không là cướp rồi.
Target's down!
Rồi, xuống rồi.
He's dead!
Marking coordinates. Take them out.
Clear, X-ray. We are engaging.
Xuống chúng ta. Hạ chúng thôi.
Damn, I'm trying to push through this.
Anh nói xuống đấy. Bắt bắn chỉ dưới đây.
Target eliminated.
Keep on them, Mason!
Texas, your target is tagged.
We see you, X-Ray. Support on the way.
안정리! người bị thương!
Multiple KHA. 0 is clear.
Để tôi lo!
Get your hands down!
Thăm rồi đi!
Nghe rồi!
Tay trở rồi!
Chú trời tha nó rồi! Đã hẹn rồi phụ!
Move, grenade!
Thương rồi!
Thăm kia!
Tập trung đi! Tập thấy đó! Phải! Chúng tôi bắt đi!
Crap, that building.
Marking coordinates. Take him out.
Texas on its way.
Ta thấy á! Có người bị
Multiple
thương!
KHA. 0 is clear.
It is good to fight by your side once more! Hurrah! Hurrah!
Next building.
Target marked. Hit him hard.
Roger, X-Ray. Hold tight.
Chúng tôi bắt đi!
Shit! Evasive action! X-Ray, we're under heavy fire! X-Ray, the grid is high. RT Texas is pulling out. Take down that anti-air and we'll return support. Over.
Understood, Texas.
I see it! CXU! Second floor, in the street! We got a tank! Off the street!
Fuck!
Mason, gotta take out that CSU! Bowman, keep these guys safe! Got it!
Có rồi! Thầy đánh nè!
This is what a lot of people miss about the Vietnam War. The NVA killed so many Vietnamese people. They killed their own people. The U.S. did bad things in Vietnam too. The U.S. isn't a saint, but a lot of people just forget the horrible things that the NVA did, like at Hue City.
Đủ má, đủ già, no more!
Xác nhận!
I couldn't believe Reznov was here in Way City. He was the defector.
He came back for you, Mason. Reznov was back.
Still in one piece, my friend.
I'm good.
Mason! You okay, brother?
I'm still breathing. We'll see you at the rally point.
Thăm rồi đi!
Tango down.
Chú xuống!
Good shot!
The CSU is right above us.
Put a charge on the ceiling! Blow the floor beneath them!
I got Charlie in my pocket here, 1-0. How much longer?
About 3 seconds. We're
Get to
clear.
a safe
Ready,
distance.
Reznov?
Good work, Mason!
There's our ride.
I'm not so sure.
Get the wounded first. More birds on their way. Sit tight. X-Ray, air support is offline while we evacuate the wounded.
Looks like we gotta wait. Everyone load up. I want this LZ secure. Mason set up charges around the perimeter.
Get the wounded first. More birds on their way. Sit tight.
Here they come!
Nghe rồi!
Target down!
From the southeast! Enemy down!
Contact down.
Contact down! Throw him back!
Contact down! Roger that!
Reloading.
Enemy down!
They're pulling back!
Burn!
They're not retreating! They are regrouping!
Command! X-ray 1-0! We got a prairie fire down here! Where's that damn evac?
This city's falling to the NBA! They're picking up birds right out of the sky! You're not the only ones trying to get out!
We have a priority 1 package to extract! We need that evac!
We'll find another way! Hold your position!
American soldiers, your aggression towards the people's republic of Vietnam will not go unpunished.
X-ray! Your evac is on its way!
Instead of returning to your own country, you will die in ours.
Oh great, they got a tank.
X-ray, check your safe! We have a Navy BBR on its way!
Roger that, none too soon!
Direct fire support to cover arrival! Delta Squadron is on station!
Got it, X-ray out! Mason, mark that target!
Marking coordinates. Delta Squadron. Burn them up.
Roger, X-ray, target run.
PBR's here! Get your asses to the boat! Incoming!
Oh damn. I got completely gunned down by the tank, dude.
Roger, X-ray, target run.
PBR's here! Get your asses to the boat! Incoming! Danger close! Move it! Move!
Go to the boat.
Everything you got! Get in!
Dragovich.
So much for the Tet ceasefire.
The enemy's courage could be the result of their newfound ally.
22, 21,
They're closing in.
4, 0, 14.
Those numbers are really creepy. So I guess we will wrap this up here, guys. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed this part. If you did, drop a like. And I'll have the next part for you guys as soon as I can. Thank you for watching. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day, guys.